Welcome back. It is the beginning of bow hunting season here in Wisconsin this weekend, but it's all tied to much larger environmental goals throughout the state. Breaking down all of this, I am welcoming back our former News 3 Now meteorologist, Dana Fulton. She's now at the DNR, and she's back on our airwaves alongside the DNR's Jeff Pritzl. Here's our conversation. Dana and Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. And Dana, a huge welcome back to the Channel 3 airwaves.
Of course, it's nice to pop back on every once in a while.
So we're doing another environmental segment. Longtime viewers of the show will remember that, Dana, you used to do these, but now you're our guest, and we hope you will be our guest for many of these to come. Jeff, also warm welcome to you. I'm not trying to focus too much on Dana. But good
no, it's great to be here.
So we're talking bow hunting opener season that starts Saturday, so it'll be a day before this airs. Why don't we start big, Jeff? Describe for me how the DNR sets its strategy for monitoring, controlling deer populations across Wisconsin, why that happens, and how that plays into bow season. So a lot packed into that question.
Sure. Well, we have over 300,000 archers in Wisconsin now that are combined between vertical and crossbows. And that's been growing gradually for decades. It just reflects an enthusiasm for deer hunting in Wisconsin, which we've always had. And we use the deer hunters as their contribution through the mandatory registration of all the deer that are harvested gives us really specific numbers. And we actually use the harvest data to recreate the deer population. In other words, when the season's over, we know how many deer were harvested, and we use a formula that will then backtrack and say, for this harvest to have just happened, there must have been this many deer alive back in September for the harvest to have been allowed to happen. And then that's how we make the plans for the next deer season to figure out what the allowable harvest would be. And so that's kind of, in general, how the process works.
That's fascinating. Dana, we all know that you're a longtime hunter. How does it feel to kind of be part of this process, right? There's such a much bigger picture here, and you're kind of one piece of the whole in terms of going out there and helping manage the deer population.
Absolutely. And you're right. You're part of a bigger piece when it comes to our environment, and biologically, everything's connected in a chain. You can't take one thing out without causing a ripple effect to everything else. So as a hunter, there is an ethical obligation when you're out there to monitor and safely obtain those deer. And if you aren't in a position to take an ethical shot, to sit there and perhaps just enjoy nature, enjoy the sunrise that morning, and sit and wait in the tree stand. But you are part of that bigger picture from the herd management side to just maybe keeping an eye on things also. Sometimes our hunters can send in reports, and they're the first boots on the ground to report of some of our remote areas because they're the ones that are in the woods and on those trails. So it's nice to be out in nature and, of course, have an opportunity to fill the freezer, but it's also nice to feel like you're part of the bigger picture for a healthy ecosystem in Wisconsin.
I'm not a hunter, so please explain to me what you mean when you say an ethical shot.
When you are looking through the scope of an arrow or a gun, you have an opportunity to, again, feed your family, fill your freezer, take something that is organic and healthy back to your home. And there is something good and environmentally sound about that. But it has to be an ethical shot. There has to be a confidence there on the hunter. There's an obligation on the hunter that when you pull that trigger, you're not doing something that is going to wound the animal. You're not doing something that is going to hurt nature and hurt something that is going to have those ripple effects. So an ethical shot, when you pull that trigger, you're doing something that is going to end the animal's life with as little pain and suffering as possible, which is a loaded thing to say and put out in words, but it's part of the game. It's part of hunting, and you have to be able to understand that at the end of the day, that is what you're doing. You are pulling that trigger.
Fascinating. Jeff, talk to me big picture. We're talking a lot about how the DNR manages the deer population throughout Wisconsin, but why is that important? What happens if that sort of thing is not monitored in terms of our environment?
Sure. Well, in the world of wildlife management, when we talk about population monitoring or population management, the annual population cycle of birth and death is obviously paramount. And so when we talk about decisions that we make as it relates to a game species like deer, the question of what is the role of the human mortality that's imparted on that population through hunting? And then is that mortality factor what we consider compensatory mortality or additive mortality? So what that means basically is a certain number of deer are going to perish every year for a number of reasons because there's limited space and limited resources. And so the objective, if you want a sustainable wildlife population that's hunted, is that the harvest, the human harvest during the hunting season, is just compensatory. In other words, it's not adding to that overall mortality of the population if the objective is to keep that population stable. Now, in the case of deer, there are certain places in the state where it's recognized the deer population is probably higher than it should be. Then you want that human harvest to be additive. You want it to actually increase the mortality rate to bring that population back down, either in balance with its environment or in some cases in balance with human tolerance, because species like deer can have impacts and conflicts with people as it relates to agricultural crops or car accidents and those types of things.
Could you talk me through just some of the basic population numbers of deer right now? How many might be shot during a season? What does that look like?
Sure. Well, one of the things that's interesting about Wisconsin is it's very diverse from north to south and east to west. So one story doesn't fit every corner of the state. But in general, if we just looked at it statewide, as we enter this fall, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 2 million deer wandering around somewhere in Wisconsin. And during the collective hunting seasons, we will harvest about 300 to 350,000 deer. In general terms, we've got 600,000 deer hunters in Wisconsin, half of which are now archers, either vertical or crossbow hunters. And so that's 300,000 people that are going to be out there. And those archers, they contribute about 2/3 of the hunting effort. They hunt from now until January, but they take about 1/3 of the total harvest. The firearm hunters have a much more concentrated time period, but it's more efficient. And that's about 1/3 of the effort, but they'll harvest 2/3 of the animals that way.
Dana, I know you're passionate about getting people on board with hunting. What does that mean to you? I mean, you're a woman in hunting, which we all know is not quite as common. How do you get more people on board? How do you get people excited about it?
Sure. It's absolutely not as common, but thankfully it's growing and growing because I think more people see value in getting outside. And honestly, some of the mornings where I can just sit there and watch the sunrise and watch the woods wake up are just as enjoyable and as rewarding as a morning when you have a Boone and Crockett deer walk in front of you, a big buck walk in front of you. But it's a part of feeling connected to nature and being connected to our environment when you're able to sit out there and be in it and take something from it. You're responsible for that. I really enjoy the idea of having organic and ethically sustained food. There are a lot of different arguments back and forth on where our food sources are coming from, whether it is local, whether it is organic, what industries are you supporting? And this is a way that you can support our natural resources and take something that is local. So I do have a strong foothold in that, but it is encouraging from a female standpoint to see that rise in the diversity in our woods, because when it comes to archery and crossbow hunting, it can be a great introduction to people that might be a little more gun adverse, that might not want to get into all the ins and outs of gun knowledge quite yet. This could be a way for them to get into hunting and enjoy being out in nature without taking that extra step to learn guns. They can start with archery or with crossbow. Maybe they fall in love with it like I have, and they don't move over to guns. They can stick with the season. It's a longer season also in Wisconsin to stick with archery.